Hello and welcome to the Brazil Institute podcast, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholar, the world's #1 think tank for regional studies. I'm your host, Bruna Santos, the director of the Brazil Institute, and we launch one episode every first Friday of the month. So please enjoy our discussions and subscribe on your preferred platform. Brazil is hosting municipal elections in October 2024 with 5,569 municipalities and over 156 million voters deciding on new mayors and city council members. The results are crucial and usually overlooked from an international perspective. This Sunday, Brazil will hold the first round of municipal elections, followed by the second round on the 27th of October. Today, we are here speaking with Thiago Vidal from Brazil, Director of Political Analysis at Prospectiva Public Affairs, to discuss his perspective on these elections and focusing on Brazil's current polarization and its potential impacts on both the Lula administration and the 2026 presidential race. Thiago, thank you so much for being here with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Bruna. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thiago, I know you have years of experience analyzing elections in Brazil. And I want you to just give our listeners a little bit of perspective on why it matters for them to pay attention to Brazil's municipal elections at this point.
Well, contrary to common belief, to what common sense usually makes us think, municipal elections in Brazil are really focused on what's happening locally. Most cities in Brazil have populations between 2,000 and 20,000. So it's really not what we tend to see, for example, what's happening in São Paulo, Rio, which have a large number of people. And most cities actually struggle financially. We're talking about 90% of cities in the country, out of those 6,000 cities that you described, relying on cash transfers from the federal and state level to make ends meet. So it's really something that is not really related to what's happening nationwide. We don't usually see big national discussions happening at the local level when we have local elections. And this year specifically, healthcare is the top concern for around 20% of Brazilians, according to the Latino Barometer survey, making the country unique in Latin America, where most countries tend to prioritize public safety and economic issues as their main concern. Considering Brazil's turbulent period, Bruna, since 2010, with the 2013 demonstrations, Dilma's impeachment in 2016, the economic crisis that began in 2013, 2014, obviously Bolsonaro's election in 2018, and the pandemic, I think this is going to be the first normal election in nearly 15 years. So it's something to be celebrated, sort of, but it's also something that I'm very curious of to know how it's going to develop and what this will actually mean for the country, since that this is the first time that we're experiencing some sense of normality in about 15, 20 years.
Yeah, let's make the elections normal again, right? It's important. So Brazil is a very polarized country. It's already like common sense to say that. And we expect that this election will reveal that a little bit of how we may experience polarization in 2026. Do you agree with that? And also, I wanted to hear a little more from you and for you to explain to our listeners how we may play out in small cities, because we know that out of 5,570 cities in Brazil, a big portion of that are very small cities, like with less than 50,000 inhabitants. So how do you think that may play out across the country?
Yes, we are, first of all, really very polarized. We remain very polarized even after 2 years into the Lula 3 administration. National polls regarding the president's approval ratings haven't changed much. So this is something that will likely continue until 2016. Regarding the municipal elections, as I was saying, they are hardly affected by the national debate, precisely because most cities, as you have just said, are small, and despite candidates sometimes trying to capitalize on national figures such as Lula and Bolsonaro. So it's really about what's happening locally. I mean, people are actually concerned with what the mayor or what the city councilors are going to deliver. If utilities are working, if health services are being provided, that's what's keeping Brazilians awake at night. And we tend to pay a lot of attention to what's happening in Brazil's largest cities, such as São Paulo, Rio, Belo Horizonte, and so on. But these are, again, more the exception rather than the rule. Even though, again, we tend to focus and almost limit the election to these big cities. So, again, polarization is obviously a variable that has long been shaping Brazil's politics. It is playing a role, especially in Brazil's large urban centers. But locally, I don't think that's playing a significant role, at least in 2024. It does not mean that, again, we will not be arriving in 2026 with a polarized country and with what's happening in 2024 shaping eventually the next general election. But polarization itself, aside from what's happening in the big cities of the country, is not the variable that's, again, shaping the electoral landscape.
One thought. The recent events in São Paulo mayor elections, I think, highlighted the increase of violence surrounding elections all over the world. Like when you look at the U.S., for example, we had assassination attempts happening here. An assassination attempt happened in Brazil's election with Bolsonaro when he was stabbed. We saw one candidate hit another candidate with a chair, literally, during the debate in São Paulo. Some people, including me, think that this may be a sign that we may see political violence more and more in elections throughout Latin America. Do you agree with that? What are your thoughts about it?
Yes. Starting from the last part of your question regarding Latin America, I think we are all already experiencing a significant wave of electoral violence. I mean, just take, for example, what happened in Ecuador last year with the assassination of a presidential candidate. What happened in Mexico this year? This was the most violent election in Mexico, in years. So yes, that's not something that we're only seeing in Brazil. But with regards to Brazil and specifically what you said about São Paulo, although São Paulo may not fully reflect what's happening in the national debate, its status as the largest electoral college gives it significant nationwide impact, obviously. So regardless of who wins the mayorship at the end of the month, of next month, the fact that a candidate who makes Bolsonaro look civilized is now polling at 25% is somewhat telling of what's going on with the average Paulista voter, right? So I think that's going to have significant repercussions for 2026, again, regardless of whoever ends up winning the mayorship at the end of the next month. I cannot say necessarily what are the specific numbers regarding violence in Brazil this year, but I have some interesting data taken from the Observatory of Political and Electoral Violence here in Brazil, which has pointed to almost 500 acts of violence having been committed against political leaders between the beginning of the year and September. Again, this is not official data. This is something that a university observatory collects, but it's a very valuable data, and I think it's worth having it in mind. And this makes it, as I was saying, also in the case of Brazil, the most violent election we have seen since 2016, at least. So yes, this is certainly a concerning situation for the country, which again is not isolated from what's happening in the rest of the region. Now, is this a bellwether of what's going to be happening in 2026 during the general election? Too soon to know, honestly. But what I think is going to happen is that the general election that will take place in 2 years will be less guided by policy and more by personal affiliation with candidates. That's something that we saw in 2018 with Bolsonaro, obviously. That's happening in many large urban centers in Brazil today, and that's going to continue in 2026. So as long as polarization persists, and I think it will persist until 2026, I think debates in general will continue to lack substance, at least for some more time.
And do you think that besides lacking substance, which definitely is happening also in many other parts of the world and the hemisphere, do you think they're also having less impact in how voters behave? Like the margins are actually like closer to zero on how much they are changing votes?
Yeah, I mean, during very polarized times, it's very hard to move the needle in favor or against whoever candidate is running. People, when the first act of violence happened here in Brazil, in the city of São Paulo, people were very curious as to what would happen with the voting intentions on the candidates that are running in São Paulo. And although some votes did change a little, recent polling that was released a few days ago have shown that the game is very similar to what it was before the act of violence. So I don't think that the game is changing because of that. I think the debates in Brazil, the way that debates are conducted, like the concept of debate, the way they are structured, I think they should be undergoing some revision. They are very strict. They do not allow for the candidates to actually explain what they are proposing. Many candidates who are not really backed by strong parties, by strong grassroots movements, sometimes can participate in the debate, and this makes candidates who don't really have anything to add to the public debate, participate without actually, again, adding value to what's being discussed. So I think that's something that the country itself must deal with. I mean, what's the form of debates that we have? For example, I think that the debates that the U.S. has right now are more flexible. That's a way of debating that we could eventually try here in Brazil. But again, this is something that the TV stations and news outlets should be discussing, not me.
Yeah. So, well, since Jair Bolsonaro was elected in 2018, we've seen him embody a movement that we refer to as Bolsonarism, right? Which appears to have somehow, at this point, transcended his personal image. It's been like we are rethinking this movement as we speak. And as a result, I think that various analyses suggest that despite Bolsonaro losing the recent presidential elections, Bolsonarism is still like here to stay. It may be revamped, it may not, may have another image, another political leader, may have not. Do you believe these elections will serve as a way for us to feel the pulse of Bolsonarismo throughout the country?
Yes, I in fact have long agreed with the thesis that Bolsonarism is the wave. Bolsonarism is bigger than its leader. The thing is that I do not see this movement, the Bolsonarism, necessarily revolving around Bolsonaro specifically. In the case of the former president, he was smart enough before 2018. That's a movement that began in 2014 or so. He was smart enough to understand the moment that the country was going through, and he seized that opportunity electorally. So he gave voice to a significant portion of the Brazilian population who maybe had always been more radical, but for some reason was afraid to express their own opinions. And precisely because the Bolsonarismo movement does not necessarily revolve around him, I think that this year's election may eventually show what's going to happen with the far right. And this is what makes this election in particular so intriguing. While many candidates, Bruna, are taking inspiration from him, from Bolsonaro, and using his personal image to leverage their own candidacies, some have actually distanced and even detached themselves from Bolsonaro. That's happening in São Paulo, for example. So it will be interesting to see whether Bolsonaro can continue to lead this movement, or if it has outgrown him, leaving the the former president without actually full control of his own creature, so to speak. If the second scenario holds, if it is true that the Bolsonarism movement is bigger than Bolsonaro, I think he could face serious trouble. He depends on himself being the leader of that movement to have a political future. And understanding, and I think this is the big thing here, understanding the Brazilian far right will become even more challenging if we end up having Bolsonarism without Bolsonaro as its main leader.
Excellent. One thing I think would be awesome if you could elaborate a little more, Thiago, is that how much in 1988 our democratic constitutions decentralized power to cities in Brazil, and how different it is from the US, for example, especially in terms of implementation of policies at the local level for health and education. Can you give a little bit of perspective for us on that and tell our listeners why it matters for them to understand it and as the importance of the municipalities in the implementation of public policies in Brazil?
Sure, yes. Well, it is true. The 1988 Constitution gave a lot of power to municipalities and states also. Basically, what happened was that they felt that it was important to decentralize the country to improve policymaking and to improve the quality of public services. That was the idea. From the fact that we are a federation as well. What happened, though, is that while the obligations were given to the states and specifically to the cities, the means for them to carry out their obligations were not distributed. So basically what happens is that most of revenue collection in Brazil lies with the federal government, and some part of it with the states, whereas cities don't really have the financial means to comply with their obligations. So they are always asking the governors and the federal administration for more money. So this is curious because we tend to see during local elections mayors saying that they will do a lot of stuff that they can't actually do, not only because maybe it's not something that falls within their jurisdictions, but also because they honestly don't have the financial means to fulfill those promises. And that also kind of helps this cycle, this wave of this satisfaction of politicians increase in the sense that the promises are very, very bold and the results are on the other side of the spectrum. So, but again, this is something that was thought 35 years ago as a means for improving policymaking, improving the quality of public services. But the way that they built this structure was not well thought, I think. I mean, we should be having a discussion on how states and cities could improve their revenue collections instead of just having the obligations that the Constitution gives them.
That's awesome. Thank you, Thiago, for addressing that. I think it's a really important matter, especially since, as I always say, I think Brazil and the US have the challenge to show the world that democracies can deliver. And to deliver, you have to deliver policies at the local level, and it entails a lot of complexity. So your answers here helped us unpack those complexities, and especially in light of elections. So thank you so much, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. This is the Brazil Institute podcast, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, coming out the first Friday of every month. My name is Bruna Santos, and the producer is Facundo Robles. Thank you, and I see you next month.